What has happened is a colossal military disaster. We shall go on to the end. We shall never surrender.
Hello and welcome to Mad About Film. This is my review of the film Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, and I am reviewing it today for the first and probably only time with a friend of mine who is also a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker called Saeed Taji Farouky. You'd probably want to say your name better, or do you think...
Saeed.
Saeed.
Let's go with Saeed.
But let's say the full name.
Saeed Taji Farouky.
Cool.
Saeed Muhannad Taji Saeed Al Farouky is my full name.
Okay, well anyway, he's a filmmaker and he is a very talented filmmaker, and he does a lot of documentary. I'd say you do a lot of mainly documentary content, essentially.
Mostly.
Could you give us a little intro about actually your films before we go into Dunkirk?
Oh, sure. I would call them human rights films. Quite long-term, usually quite slow, character-based, in-depth films. Mostly Arab world-based until now. But then my last film was Afghanistan. The film I'm making now is in Burma. But there's always a very strong human rights or social justice aspect to the films.
Dunkirk is the new film by Christopher Nolan, who has done films such as Interstellar, Memento, The Prestige, which is a very good film, I think.
I always forget that.
Yeah, it's really good. Christopher Nolan's film Dunkirk is obviously about the evacuation of Dunkirk of about 338,000 men. There were 400,000 men stranded on the beach during this period of time, around about, I think it's 1941. I think that's when this is the year it happened. But it was 400,000 men stranded on a beach, and at least 338,000 of them managed to survive this particular incident. And it is a very interesting film. It's a very harrowing film from my perspective. And actually, your first initial thoughts about Dunkirk. Go.
Okay. I mean, overall, I would say, so for Christopher Nolan...
Harry Styles.
Harry Styles. I am generally a fan of Christopher Nolan.
Okay.
I like his films. I love that he's really bold. He makes very bold decisions. In some way, he's almost like an experimental mainstream filmmaker, which I think is fascinating. The fact that he can do something like... I think this is a great example. I mean, if you just looked, without knowing anything about Christopher Nolan, if this film just came out, it's almost like an experimental film. I mean, if I said to you, oh, there's a French experimental filmmaker, they made this film about the Second World War that has music from beginning to end, basically the entire film is a climax, there's very little dialogue in it, that would seem consistent with what he made. So the fact that he does that in Hollywood, with sometimes really big stars, I think is incredible. And it's pushing the envelope for other filmmakers like myself who are really into more experimental stuff. So that I think is fantastic. Having said that, I think since Inception, which for me is his best film, his films have gotten worse.
Really?
Until now, I think this film got better. But, not into Interstellar, it really didn't work for me.
Wrong.
Not into Dark Knight Rises. Don't tell me you thought that was a good film.
Dark Knight Rises?
Yeah.
I think it's a good film. I think it's playing into what needs to be a comic book film.
Well, he has a big advantage, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why maybe Dunkirk is better than Interstellar or Dark Knight Rises. One of the advantages he has is that he knows pretty much everyone who sees the film will know at least the basic facts about Second World War and Dunkirk.
Yep.
So you don't need to introduce it, you don't need to tell people this is the world it lives in, right? He can start immediately and you're in that world. He doesn't need to build it for the audience because we've seen so much imagery of the Second World War that everything just fits in immediately. So in one sense, I'm not a huge fan of World War II films. I'm not usually drawn to them just because there are so many, but it works to his advantage because then he just drops you right in the middle of the story.
I mean, okay, so let's talk about the beginning of Dunkirk, where he does literally drop you into the beginning of the story. And you said to me earlier about there being a lot of things are very quickly established in that first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, the location, the sense of the situation, I guess the sense of desperation is quite important in kind of highlighting how desperate the situation currently is. 5 guys who are British and only one of them manages to get away in the first 5 minutes. And that's one thing I have to say about this review, is that there's a lot of spoilers in this review.
Oh yeah.
That's very important as well.
Yeah.
Real leaflets, real design, real imagery from World War II. Obviously very good attention to detail on that, I think. They're obviously sent by the Germans to the Allies and all the rest to say, you are surrounded, give up now, when the fact is that it's just like, I just think it's wonderful how, like, that's what I love about film, the attention to detail and the research that goes into a film to make sure that kind of thing happens, to realise the composite of a shot and all that stuff happens. And then what I like about it is also in that scene, he gets his first sort of lead character, kind of like he's trying to have a shit. And basically he's like, he wipes his arse with those papers. They're kind of little things like that, little touches, which I think are quite vital, I think, as such.
And I think that's when I think Christopher Nolan's films work best, is in the really small details. I think when he tries to do really big dramatic set pieces, or particularly when he tries to do big dialogue scenes, because I think in general, I think he's really bad at dialogue. Those scenes for me, the obvious kind of big things, never work as well. The stuff that works for me is the really small things that he does.
I'd love to get onto dialogue in a bit. I was just thinking about, like, one thing that is important is the leaflets and the setup of the first 5 minutes. One thing you mentioned earlier was the sense of dread. Could you tell me a little bit?
Well, I mean, as soon as you see the leaflets, well, first of all, the streets are empty, so already you feel that something is really wrong. Can we swear in this?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Not too flagrantly.
Okay.
Twat.
Was that in context?
That was just highlighting what kind of word you could say.
I can't say. All right. So visually it's showing you everyone is surrounded.
Yeah.
So it's very good. It's very good exposition, really quickly, without having to tell you anything.
Yeah.
And the other thing it does, which I find interesting. So one of the reasons I don't like many war films is because I think even the most, kind of war films with the best intentions, where they really want to be critical of war, it's almost impossible to make a war film that is an anti-war film. For most people, I think. Yes, agreed. Unless you're extremely critical. So the fact that the film opens with the propaganda, I think, is fascinating, because in fact the film itself, I'm not saying that it is propaganda, but war films are very much part of propaganda historically. And our job as filmmakers, if you want to make an anti-war film, is to say, how can I make something different from this? So, but it's immediately telling you this is a world in which propaganda exists, and then you see that film and you think, is this part of propaganda? Right? In either a good way or a bad way. So I found that, I don't know if that's intentional, but for me it's a very kind of meta way of describing the beginning of the film.
I just want to say, as a filmmaker, I'm so in love with you right now.
Thank you.
Because that's a very good point.
Oh, right.
One thing about also that first 5 minutes as well, in terms of tension and dread, one thing that's very noticeable is the score. So could you tell me what you think about Hans Zimmer's score for this particular film? I've got certain opinions about Hans Zimmer's score for Christopher Nolan films, but you tell me what you think about it, because it is, you said there's something about the clicking, the ticking of the clock and that kind of thing, but also you go for it. You tell me what you think about that, and I'll tell you my opinion on that.
I think, in general, Hans Zimmer is just very samey. He's very successful at what he does, and I think he does it well, but it's almost the same music in every film. He's a little more experimental in this one, which I like. There are some bits of minimalism that are really powerful. He's even doing some a lot of discordant stuff that you get in much more modern music that I think is really... So even some of the orchestration reminded me of stuff like Johnny Greenwood, discordant strings and that kind of thing, and sounds instead of just notes. That I think worked really well. The fact that it's literally wall-to-wall music is I think an incredible choice, really bold choice.
I think he's worked with Christopher Nolan far too much.
Right.
I thought his music for Interstellar, I could be wrong about this, by the way, I'm pretty sure it's Hans Zimmer doing Interstellar music, but anyway.
It is also.
But I loved the music for Interstellar. It was very dynamic and huge and beautiful.
It is huge.
And I loved that.
Okay.
But I think with this particular film, it was very simple and straightforward. He kind of, like, one thing I've noticed is also one thing about his music, say in The Dark Knight, it was a 2-note kind of sort of tension building kind of music that he had for when the Joker's presence was in the film. And for this film, I just felt it a little bit, just a bit much, really. And at the same time, there was the use of Elgar at a certain point in the film when the ships come in to kind of rescue some of the soldiers, and it was it was a laboured, forced kind of point, but there was definitely a sample of Elgar in that music,
right,
which kind of then also leads to the kind of nationalistic and patriotic aspects to the film. It lends itself very well, and it's kind of melded quite nicely. But again, for me, this is my main problem with the film. It's just too obvious. The film itself is a very much a tension building, survivalist kind of film, and it has sort of different key stories and different key factors going on and all the rest, and different kind of stories from different backgrounds, obviously land, sea, air. But the culmination of it, when it hit that apex point in the film, I just felt like, okay,
right,
not like this is mind blowing.
Okay,
do you know what I mean? I think that for me, it feels like there's something else that could have been explored here,
right?
But as opposed to just a direct telling, and then using Christopher Nolan as a kind of stylistic choice to make this kind of film. Okay, there's no way of getting away from it. We have to talk about Harry Styles in this film.
Big fan. Big fan.
He's joking, by the way.
Yeah,
I think that says it all for me. It just like
I didn't see the point.
I didn't see the point. I'm sorry.
Was so much
One Direction fans.
There was so much press around it that he was in it. There was, he's not exactly a great actor. I mean, maybe he's not bad. I don't know.
He wasn't bad.
No, he wasn't bad.
He was subtle enough. But the thing is, why did he have the most lines in the film?
True.
Why was Why was he in particular scenes of a film where he just stood out from the crowd, and that kind of, for me, defeated the point. It took away from the lead character, and it took away from even the second lead character. Obviously, there's the actor that played, it's Fionn Whitehead, I think his name is.
Okay.
Is the lead actor, and then another guy who was playing the French guy.
Right.
And if you don't know he's French. And then then there's Harry Styles, and I just felt like his presence slightly dominated proceedings.
It's the distraction. That's the problem.
And he played the bad guy, which is kind of cool in a good way. I don't know if that's a good device, but I still don't. I wish he died.
In reality or in the film?
In the film.
I mean, it's also...
Because that would be sick if I thought that
in real life.
That's just wrong.
I don't think... I mean, it's interesting that except for Mark Rylance and Tom Hardy, but you never see his face. I mean, there's no single star that dominates the film.
Yeah.
But it is an issue when the actor that people talk about most in your film is Harry Styles. I mean, I think it's a problem. I think that's to the detriment of the film.
Sorry. I just got Tom Hardy's Bane voice in my head.
Well, I mean, he has some fetish for Tom Hardy wearing a mask. Yeah. It's a bit strange.
Yeah.
We'll see what he makes next film's going to be like Ned Kelly or something, like with Tom Hardy.
I was like,
rescue you, I will.
Like, I can imagine.
That's Yoda.
That is, but there's a strong similarity between Yoda and Bane.
But Bane doesn't have issues with word order.
Can't do it. It's funny. It's just funny.
I know I'm going to try. I think it's a problem. Also, his hair bothered me. It seemed like a very modern haircut to me.
Oh, Harry Styles' hair?
Yeah.
Come on. I thought Mark Rylance was very powerful in the film.
Yeah.
The actor that played the son, Peter, was very good in this film.
Oh, right,
and I can't remember his name, but anyway, I'm sure I'll put it in the notes in the video. And the young guy that played George as well was very good. Who's the Irish guy? Cillian Murphy. So Cillian Murphy playing the shell-shocked character.
Yeah.
Very good. Fine. I think sometimes also in a war film, you need to relate to the characters more.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there were parts of the film where I think, because things are moving fast, there's a pace to it, and it's all about survival, and you have to kind of follow this one particular character's lead through the story. But also, Christopher Nolan is trying to tell the story of a man who he wants to tell every man's story from Dunkirk.
Yeah.
So the point is that how do you get so objective and tell every man's story, but at the same time try and be really subjective and say this is this person's particular story.
Right.
It's like if you had the lead character and you knew his name properly. In the notes, he's called Tommy. So that could be anyone, any soldier during World War II.
Sure.
It's very generic. But the point is that if you had more backstory about this particular character, you then invest time into that character to understand it more.
Yeah.
There's the separation, I think, within telling a war film where you can really invest yourself into it emotionally. Whereas this was like you're in it, you're having the IMAX experience, you're submerged literally in certain situations within the film, and in that sense you're an observer, but you're there.
Yeah.
But you still can't relate to people around you. So it's almost like saying this story is your story.
That's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. And that's why also the focus on Dunkirk and the focus on the flotilla, of sailors, British sailors. I'm sure the whole point was a war story that we can relate to, or that is for the everyman.
Yeah.
The problem is there really are not that many characters in the film. I mean, he doesn't, in terms of script, and again, I think this is an issue with writing, which I think is his weakest point. I think he's phenomenally, as a director, he's fantastic. In terms of pacing, amazing. Boldness, fantastic. But his writing is the weakest part of his films.
Yeah.
And there's really no writing that develops characters in this film. When I remember it now, what I remember is the visuals, I remember the sound, I remember the feeling, the pacing. But in terms of individual actors embodying a character, other than Mark Rylance, who can do that, with the phone book, because he's such a good actor, it's not there. So yeah, Tommy, I get his story, I understand what he's trying to do, but there's very little character invested in the script.
I think you made a very good point. It's the idea of character, and he's very good at ensemble. Inception is an ensemble. Prestige is a bit more sort of direct between two characters, but so there's kind of big cast there. So it's a sizable cast. Interstellar, ensemble cast.
Yeah.
This is a huge ensemble cast, and I think that if it comes down to real character analysis and situation, you never really know his characters deeply.
Yeah.
I think the only character you really get to know is Bruce Wayne in the Batman trilogy, because he really invests time into discovering what that character is about, and that's part of the journey in those films.
Well, and one of the films is literally about how he became Batman.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
So, but in terms of the ensemble cast situation, this is where maybe he kind of lacks the punch to kind of really draw you in a bit more if you were to invest more into character. Compare character analysis between Christopher Nolan and Richard Linklater. And you've got two very separate ball games on your hand.
Yeah.
But there was one thing about another fault of Dunkirk is the editing. We do have to mention the editing on this as well, because I found in terms of the time structure and the kind of, I know he likes to flip between stories and do the time thing like he's done in Memento before. In Memento to great effect and also almost sublimity, I don't know what you call it, but just really good in Memento, to this where it just felt like things jarred and the timelines jarred a little bit, and I felt from a filmmaker's perspective that the editing wasn't spot on.
Yeah, it's weird. I found it surprisingly weak, because usually it's really good. I mean, it was well paced. I thought the pacing was amazing. Like, you don't feel like you just sat through 100 minutes of giant cinema, but there were some cuts that really just jumped out at me, and I just thought, I couldn't understand why the decision was made. Sometimes I felt like he left scenes way too early, and not in a good way. There's a very effective way of editing where you kind of withhold a tiny bit and you want the audience to want more. This was just, 10, 20 seconds too soon. Like a scene was just resolving, and then what you want, for me at least, what I want is the emotion. But I think for Chris Nolan, very often he's like, I don't need that stuff. I want to get to the next big action set. I want to get to the next shot at the expense of emotion. So something happens, someone gets shot. I'm fascinated to know, how does the person next to them react? What's the fear of that feeling? But you don't get that in his films because
it's pace. No.
Yeah, and I just think he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't realize it's necessary.
Funny enough, I actually thought the editing in Dark Knight Rises was really bad too.
I was distracted by how bad the film was. I don't remember the
Really?
editing. Yeah,
the editing is pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, so there, look at your editor, basically, is the thought on that one.
I think it's also, I just think he doesn't think that reaction is that important, or emotional reaction is that important. I think he thinks he does, but he does it by giant orchestral sounds and a cheesy line like, it looks like home.
So he's like an artist with a massive paintbrush, as opposed to...
That's exactly what he is.
Someone like, who could we say, Monet, who would kind of look at the intricate details.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is. I mean, and he's not on the terrible side. Like you mentioned Michael Bay. Michael Bay is an extreme example of that.
Yeah.
I don't think Christopher Nolan is that extreme, but I do think you know, if this film was made with much more attention to detail of the characters and much more space for emotional responses, but very reserved emotional responses, it would have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, restraint. There's just very little restraint, basically, is what I'm saying.
DOP. Okay, technical thing. DOP, Hoyt van Hoytema, who I think worked on Interstellar and this, and Spectre with Sam Mendes.
He worked on a lot of those.
He's worked on loads of films, hasn't he? Hoyt van
Huge
Hoytema.
films.
Very good films. But what I loved about, actually, this is one thing I actually did love about Dunkirk, was the Spitfire scenes. For me, as a kid, personally, watching Spitfires as a kid, I'm not that old. What I loved about the DOPing for the Spitfire scenes was the fact that they managed to get IMAX cameras on the Spitfires.
Which is insane.
It's insane. It's completely insane. And at the same time, they had the pilot behind the actual Tom Hardy, for example.
Yeah.
And so Tom Hardy was there. There's the pilot piloting the plane. There's Tom Hardy doing his mask, kind of like use the eyebrows and eyes to kind of convey emotion and everything.
Yeah.
And all the rest. And then they've got those cameras there, and you're just seeing these IMAX cameras from these planes. And I think that is a remarkable achievement in terms of filmmaking.
Oh, it is. Visually, this thing looks incredible.
Like,
almost every shot is just a beautiful painting.
If there's one thing you can give him absolute credit for pushing the boundaries in terms of filmmaking, what is achievable in today's filmmaking environment all over the world, he is completely up there.
Yeah.
And in that sense, this is why sometimes people I've read that people refer to him as the modern David Lean. And in that sense, I kind of agree, because I think I kind of agree that Christopher Nolan is on a par. Not on a par, I mean, they're two different filmmakers, but there's similarities between the two of them, where they're pushing the boundaries of filmmaking to make people and the audience perceive these environments, these worlds, and all these things, and that's one thing that I have to give them credit for. Why are we so passionate about the medium? Because it informs everything we do, and we also like to criticize and analyze. Like any industry, you would try and shape and reshape the form and the idea of it, and where it can go, and the possibilities are endless, really.
Exactly.
And the possibilities are endless. I don't know why.
I was wondering what you were doing.
But the
just working with you, man, sometimes it's just like a Chinese puzzle, you know. I just can't figure it out.
That's really interesting that you say that, because sometimes I just feel.
No, okay, no. Let's not go.
I just feel really spaced, you know, out about things.
I'm gonna knock this whole thing over.
Okay, right. So Christopher Nolan's politics in Dunkirk. What would you like to say about that? Because I know you're going to say something about it.
Of course. I mean, I don't think we can separate between cinema and politics and light. I'm not one of these people who goes, oh, well, it's only a film. Because I think at this point, so many of us get our view of the world, of our society, of our government, of our country, from culture in general, let's say. And cinema is a huge part of that. Mm-hmm. And he's a huge part of that as a successful filmmaker.
One thing that you can highlight in this film in Dunkirk, and obviously has been noticed in the social media, obviously there's no Indian faces, even though there were Indian soldiers that obviously were part of Dunkirk.
Oh yeah, thousands, hundreds of thousands.
If you want, maybe you want to say something about that as well.
Well, and North African, West African soldiers in the French army on a huge scale. I mean, I've read Sunny Singh's essay and a lot of essays based on it. That also bothers me, but I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't read those articles. But it makes a very good point that if if the only image of victory and nationalism that you present is purely white, it's going to resonate within society. Yeah, and that is an issue. But for me, actually, I was politically more bothered by the fact that still, even though it's trying to be a radical war film, or at least some kind of anti-war film, it's still very nationalistic at the end, and it still gives you what I think is a very fake sense of what heroism in war looks like. That's not. I don't believe in that form of classic cinematic heroism, and I would never want to make a. I mean, I made a war film, but every time I saw that creeping in, we took it out or we undermined it in some way, because that's not. When someone comes home and you give them a medal, and you sort of create a narrative around them as being heroic, it never looks like that in real life. And I'm saying this as someone I've seen war in Afghanistan. I filmed it for my film. People don't say things that are dramatic, and people don't do things and others look at them like they're heroes. You just do what you have to do to survive. And sometimes it means you pull someone with you and you save their life. But it doesn't look like that. That's not real to me.
In that sense, but this film, obviously I'm not comparing your film to Dunkirk. But but do you think that in the sense of just focusing on the idea of survival within Dunkirk, do you think that achieves the point he's probably trying to say within the film? Let's
For
take
some
away...
of the characters, yes.
Yeah, that's really... Do you know what? Something just came into my head about that thing. Dunkirk is an underdeveloped screenplay.
Yes.
It's a film made, potentially, from an underdeveloped screenplay, and maybe the techniques and the filmmaking techniques paced over the real aspects of story within the film.
That is Christopher Nolan's career. Because his vision comes, I think, now predominantly from the technical aspect, he doesn't care. And because his films are so successful, the studio's not going to push it. But I think it's a problem, because I think people will tire from it. That style of filmmaking.
Final note.
I think overall it's a great film. I mean, I am being very critical of it, but it's about war, and that's something I'm very emotional about, so it makes me very critical. But also because it aims for so much, so you're opening yourself up to criticism. But technically, visually, in terms of audio, it is absolutely phenomenal.
Fantastic. Well, I hate to give it a rating, but to be honest, I'm probably now, after this discussion, I was going to give Dunkirk 4 out of 5 stars, but I think I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5, knowing what we've talked about, actually. And if you're going to rate it?
I'm 3.25, maybe.
3.25.
I mean, it's worth going to see it just for the spectacle and the technical aspect of it.
Cool. What are you going to be doing next in terms of your filmmaking career, and what films are coming out for you and projects?
I'm working on another documentary, another feature documentary. This one is about oil from a very singular human perspective. And I'm working on my second short fiction. So I made a very short for Channel 4, 3 minutes. Now we're working on a 20-minute film. And then after that, it'll be a fiction. So my dream is really to do both whenever each project calls for a different type of film.
Cool. Okay, well, this has been Saeed Taji Farouky, and he is the director of Tell Spring Not to Come this year, which was a film that won an award, I believe, for which award was it?
It won 2 awards at Berlinale 2015.
Cool. Check it out if you can, and also I'll put the information for his work in the links below. Please make sure you like and subscribe. It's really important to me. It makes me happy, and at the same time, keep watching, and I'll let you know when the next review is going to be out. Thanks very much. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
No worries. Great.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. It was very hard work, actually, to be fair. I'm going to be perfectly honest.
What?
That was just too much.
How is that hard work?
No, it was good. That was actually really good fun.
I just, I can talk a lot about films, man.
And of course.